Georgia gets this right, they're going to be really good in 2024. Something to watch out for in a very big way. We already know this team is the betting favorite to win the national championship, but I think if they get this particular thing right, boy, people better watch out. What's that thing? I think it's the running backs. Um, it took Georgia almost the whole season to get their running backs paired up and going together, which was, of course, John Edwards and Kendall Milton. Milton dealing with injuries the bulk of the year, a very frustrating senior season until the end. Boy, when they got it going, they were really hard to stop Georgia. The only team competing with them on that front was Alabama. And I just think, you know, this program, Carson Beck is going to score his points. I mean, we saw a season ago just what he can do. Um, he doesn't need elite playmaking wide receiver ability to really score points. I mean, half the season, LaMcConkey was out. The other half the season, or whenever Brock Vandergriff was, Brock Bowers was out. I mean, those guys are certainly special players, but it never seemed like Georgia was completely clicking on offense with its receivers the whole time because one of them was hurt. I think I'm trying to think maybe the Kentucky game or the Auburn game, maybe in the Kentucky game. It just wasn't a lot, and yet they still scored a bunch of points. So if like Dylan Bell becomes a pure beast, which over here to the side is where I keep everything. You still have Robert Thomas. You have Dominic Lovett, Arian Smith, Bell. Bell just looks like he could be a real big deal here soon. Those guys are going to get theirs. Oscar Delp, I think he's going to get his. But if Georgia can really run the ball the way they didn't struggle to run the ball this past year necessarily, but they struggled to keep guys healthy in a way that could have really been detrimental to the opposition. And I think if they can just do that in 2024, they're going to be hard to deal with. I mean, just they completely imposed their will on Ole Miss. That's not the only game I'm talking about, but that was one as a good example. The Missouri game, the Ole Miss game. The later in the season you get, the more important it is going to be for you to be able to run the ball. Now, getting ETN to come in is important. You saw in the Orange Bowl, Robinson, what it was like for him and Andrew Paul. You're going to get, Dwight Phillips. You got some young guys. None of these guys are super old. Branson Robinson has played a season, and that's it. So that's a young group with the exception of ETN. But they got some guys. I mean, they got like legit 4 or 5 deep at running back that those guys can go. That's the part to me where if Georgia nails that part moving forward, they could really be hard to deal with because quarterbacks can have bad days. I mean, you're talking about one person. You're trying for that person. I mean, you want to take the burden off the quarterback sometimes. I've talked about this a lot through the years. You want to steal games with players. The Auburn game this past year, you had a really good, Carson Beck played really well, by the way, in that game. But, Brock Bowers took that game from Auburn. You want games like that where, a couple times a season, you don't have to rely on Carson Beck being, 20 of 30 for 300 yards, 2 touchdowns or 3 touchdowns, and maybe an interception. You want it to be that Carson can go out there and go for 250, on 16 of 24, and it's not a big deal. You don't think about it. You're going for 300 yards that way because you're going for 220 on the ground. I mean, that's what you want. In the entire time that Kirby's been at Georgia, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, this 9th season, I very clearly remember how the perception of Kirby Smart was. It was that they were going to grind everybody out and then let the defense do the thing. That's not really what it was necessarily, and it's certainly not what it's become. I mean, when Georgia went out and got Todd Monken and then followed that up with Mike Bobo, those are point scorers. Those are guys that want to put points on the scoreboard. Make sure the guy or girl who's working the lights has got to replace them at the scoreboard, because they're getting lit up so much. That notion, I don't know, Kirby and them were trying to change in 2000, going into the 2000 season. They were trying to change when they recruited Justin Fields. From the first two guys that Kirby recruited have not at all been like the guys since. I mean, when you think about, Jacob and Jake Fromm, Jacob East and Jake Fromm, those two guys were pocket guys. No one's confusing them with being a dual threat guy. They're just not. Carson Beck is more of a pocket guy, but he's vastly more athletic than both those guys. And I say that Jake Fromm is a athletic person. He's just not super fast in any way. And Beck, I think, is in terms of athlete at quarterback, Beck is that. But that's not necessarily what Beck is. But you look at everybody else that they've gotten: Vandegrift, Stockton, Stetson Bennett, Dwan Mathis, Jamie Newman, all these guys. They have really performed, and moved away from, we're just going to use a pocket guy. You never saw Carson do a read option. I don't remember it. I mean, I'm sure it happened in 2023, but I don't recall that. But, that was a big part of 21 and 22, particularly 22. But even that was narrow. That wasn't all the time. But, I'm getting away from my point, which is that, for the way that Carson Beck plays, he's not going to hustle around out there and make plays with his feet outside the pocket a lot. If you watch him inside the pocket, the two hands are almost always on the ball. He's moving forward with two hands on the ball. I mean, he plays it the right way, and it's not just him. Stockton does the same thing. When you have a developed run game that you can depend on, and you're not having to use Dylan Bell, a wide receiver, at running back. They were using Dylan Bell at running back, if I'm not mistaken, against South Carolina. Okay? Like, that's not going to work. That is not the way that you want to go through a season, of saying, okay, well, we can't keep anybody healthy right now at running back. We're asking Edwards to carry the load like crazy. What can we do? Oh, we're going to go with Dylan Bell. And like, that's just asking too much. I just don't, there were a lot of real issues there that if Georgia can solve them, they will really have some capability to really just get rolling here. I mean, Dylan Bell, y'all, had 7 carries for 23 yards. He had as many carries as Kendall Milton did. The people, I mean, that's just like, that's not going to work. So I think if you look at this South Carolina game as a decent example, you had Edwards with 20, Milton with 7, Bell with 7, Cash Jones, who scored a touchdown, with 2, and then Beck was, 5, some of which were sacks. And then Bowers and Roderick Robinson all had carries. This coming season, it could be very different than that. Very different than that. You could see Etienne go for 15. You could see Robinson go for, 7 each, something like that. I mean, the question then becomes, too, just how good is Nate Frazier, who I think, Matt DeBerry really likes. And I've seen, we both saw Dwight Phillips Jr. live. He is a touch and go guy. And I don't mean that. I mean, he is touch and he may be gone. Gets a touch and he might be gone. They haven't had that kind of explosiveness. As good as Kendall Milton and Edwards were, that's not the kind of back they were where they were just going to take it the distance at anyone. If I could score in one play, I'd rather do that. I would just say, oh, well, I don't really want to grind out. I'll just take the 7 points in one play. We don't have to go 6 plays. Just one is fine. That's what they'll have the capability to do more. But I think if you're looking at one thing that's really important, I think running back spot, you're going to have to rebuild at tight end. Offensive line's really good. You've got your quarterback. You've got really good receivers. But At running back, if you can control that, get that, get that going in a real big way, I mean, that's going to be a big deal for Georgia in 2024. That's something to watch as we move forward. Thanks for watching.